Hi, so we're going to talk about software. Well, we're going to extend our software talk that we took up a week or so ago. And so, what we're going to talk about today is licensing schemes and copyright and what that's all about. So, let me share my screen and we'll get right down to business. So, when you go to the slides that are linked to in class, there'll be a jump menu. And so, you can jump to the different sections of the slides. But let me back up. But this is what we're going to talk about: software licensing, copyright and copy wrong. What is Creative Commons? What is fair use? And then we're going to bring up some really interesting ethical issues at the end. Those are my favorite parts. So this will just be an embedded copy of the video that you're watching right now. So software licensing, like how do we even get computer software? I do remember a time back in the olden days when we used to actually like go to the store and buy a box of software, with software in it. And we have to pull out all the disks and plug them all into our computer. It feels like 1,000 years ago. That's not really how we get it now. How do most of you get your software? If I had to guess, I'm going to say you probably downloaded it from somewhere, right? But did you ever read all of that stuff before you hit I agree? Probably not. So there's some things in there you might want to pay attention to. Now, we're going to look at several different software licensing schemes, including open source. But this gentleman, Linus Torvalds, is someone who's been instrumental in pretty much almost every website you've ever been to, because the operating system that he developed, called Linux, is what runs the back end of most web hosts or most web servers. And so he developed this thing called open source. So in open source, we feel strongly that to really do something well, you have to get a lot of people involved. We'll talk more about open source in a few minutes. So there is a video embedded and it's linked to in class that gives the difference between open source and closed source. It's a GCF video. So to give you a good idea of what we mean when we're talking about that. And again, we'll get to this in just a minute. So there's five main licensing models that we're going to talk about, and three have something in common and the other two have something in common. So that's why they're grouped the way they are. But they all have one big thing in common, or actually two big things in common. So let's see if you can pull that out as we talk. So how do we get and use software? So regardless of how it ends up on your computer, there are some rules about how you get to use it. And so public domain software is software that's either so old or the programmer has released all copyright claims on it. Basically, it's out in the public. It can be used however you want. It's not subject to copyright. It's just out there to use. So that's an interesting. I don't know how much public domain software is out there. Freeware is a pretty common scheme also. It's available to use, it doesn't cost anything, but what is restricted is the source code. So the source code's the actual code that the programmer writes to make the program do whatever it is it's doing. Okay, that's the source code. Anyhow, so in freeware, the source code is usually closed. You can't access it, you can't modify it, and there may or may not be some restricted usage. For example, one of the most common restrictions will be, sure, you can share this, but you can't sell it. You got it for free, you have to pass it on for free. All right. Now in shareware, this is a really interesting model. So let me give you an example. If you've ever gone to buy a car, do you just order a car online and have it delivered to your house sight unseen, like you've never driven it? Of course not. You go to the car dealer or you go to a used car lot, or even if you're buying it like through Craigslist or something, you always give it a test drive, right? You want to make sure everything runs like it's supposed to run. So shareware is kind of like that. It's sort of this try before you buy model. And what shareware does is it lets you try out either all the features or a subset of the features, usually for a period of time. So you might get to try it for, 10 days. And every time you open it up, a little screen pops up and says, hey, you got 9 days left, or hey, you got 8 days left, whatever it is. You might get to try it for longer, for 30 days. It just depends on how the programmer has set it up. Another scheme is to give you access to a limited amount of features for as long as you want. But if you want the really cool stuff, then you have to pay for it. And you get a registration key that you plug into the software and then it unlocks it. Another model might be that you get to use all of the features for free for as long as you want, but it pops up a really annoying splash screen every time that says, "Hey, glad you're liking this software. If you feel like paying for it, here's how to do that." So there's lots of different models of how shareware works, but the whole idea is try before you buy. In general, shareware is closed source and the programmer keeps the copyright. So you can't turn around and share it. You can distribute it, but you have to distribute it under the same conditions that you got it under. So I'm going to skip open source and jump over to proprietary, and then we'll backtrack. Proprietary software is probably the one that you're most familiar with. So if you've used any of the Adobe products like Adobe Photoshop or any of the Microsoft products like Microsoft Word, these are all proprietary software packages. And proprietary software just means you have to buy it for one. The source code is closed for two. The programmer keeps the copyright or the company keeps the copyright. And there's usually some other restrictions on there. So I know, like with some of the Microsoft products, you can, for home use anyhow, you can buy one copy, but you can put it on like three computers. I'm not sure what the current model is, but it used to be like that. You buy one copy, you put it on three computers. You have to register all three, and now you have to register things online, and they just assume you have internet. So when you install it, one of the first things it does is ping your internet connection, and it kind of does the ET thing where it phones home and says, "Hey, I'm on a computer now. I'm here." And so they keep track of that. And then if you go to install it on more than what's allowed, it actually won't let you do it. So proprietary software is a really common model used by large companies and actually some smaller companies too. So let's jump over to open source and talk about that because this is really interesting. The source code is open, it's widely available. Anybody can get in and tinker with it, or you can download it yourself, install it, and then change it however you want. You can write things for it, add ons for it, because you have access to the source code. It's free. There's a lot of people working on it. And so the question always is like, how do those people get paid? Like proprietary makes sense, right? Because programmers, they have mortgages and kids and families and, you know, car payments and stuff. So they need to pay for their, when you buy the software, you're helping pay their salary. And that makes sense, right? But in open source, you're not paying for it. So how do they make some money? Well, that's really interesting. So let me give you an example. We use Moodle in our class, and Moodle is an open source program. So you could go to moodle.org and you could download a copy of it yourself. And if you have a web host and you know how to do these things, you can install it and use it and do whatever you want to with it. But what if you don't know how to do that? Well, I happen to know how to do that. I have it installed on our own server for our Innovation Academy stuff. And so you could hire me, you could pay me to install it. I can't charge you for the software, but you can pay me to install it. Another example might be, let's say so Moodle's another good example. When I first came to the college and we were using computer concepts as a textbook, there used to actually be a CD that came with it, and it had all these labs, and the students really liked the labs, by and large, because they were hands-on practice on some of the things they talked about in the textbook. The way the labs would get graded is a student would have to um, do their lab, and then at the end they put in their email address, they put in their ID number, and it sends it to the textbook server. And then as a teacher, I had to go to the textbook server. Like I had to go through a process. I had to download the file, I had to import it into a spreadsheet, and then I had to kind of sort through it all to make sure, to pick the high scores, and then I had to by hand put it into Moodle. Hated that part. Loved the labs, hated the grading. When I came here, a couple of the guys in our department are programmers. And so they had already figured out how to program a widget that would automatically do the teacher part. It was great. Student submits their stuff, and then every once in a while, this add-on to Moodle would ping the textbook server, download the file, parse through the file, identify what class based on the student ID number, and automatically put the high grade in the textbook. I was so excited about that. Saves so much time. So open source software lets people do things like that. Another big difference between open source software and proprietary software is in proprietary software, there tends to be a small group of people working on a specific thing, like Microsoft Word or whatever. And so there's like a team that works on that. And they work on it, work on it, work on it, and then they release it when it's ready. And then, things pop up that are problems. And so they work on it again for a long time. And then they release the next version that fixes the problems. Open source software is a very interesting model. If you go to Moodle and poke around, you'll find where they've got their repository of files. And if you're a programmer, you can get in there and you can either work on it, you can become part of the project, or if you're just a user and you're using it and you realize, oh, shoot, there's this thing that didn't work. I don't know how to fix it, but I know it didn't work. And so you file a bug report, and then somebody else who does know how to fix it sees that, fixes it, and then on the next release, the problem solved. And so in open source, the releases come pretty quickly, typically. There's a pretty robust open source community of people that work on programs. And so there's this adage that says, with many eyes, all bugs are shallow. Like the more users that use it, the more likely they're going to find some problems. They submit the problems, if problems get fixed, they push out a new release. So they'll have what's called a stable release. They're like, this is the release we know, everything pretty much works. And then as they're fixing and adding features and doing new things, and bugs are coming up, they'll put out more frequent releases so that those can get fixed. And when enough of those get fixed, then they put out another stable release. So it's a really interesting software distribution model, but it's very robust. And so that, if I go back to this quote, if I go back to the quote by Linus Torvalds, this is what he's talking about. In open source, we feel strongly that to really do something well, you have to get a lot of people involved. And it really does work pretty darn well. So what do these things all have in common? What are those five? We've got public domain, freeware, shareware, open source, and proprietary. What do they all have in common? It all has to do with various permissions around who owns the copyright and how a user can use or modify the source code. That's the key. So then we have to kind of think, what's copyright and what's the big deal? So this is a great video. This is also linked to in class. Don't copy that floppy. It's on the playlist. And I'll be honest, the first 4 minutes are really funky. They do like this whole rap song, and I'm not exactly sure what that's all about. It's funny though. But then after that, about the last 8 minutes, they really go into talking to people who are software developers. They talk to someone who got put in jail for copyright infringement. They talk to just all kinds of people. So I think you'll find this a really interesting video, even if it is a little bit entertaining right at the beginning. So now let's jump into copyright. So what is this whole copyright thing we're talking about? Where did this idea come from? How does it even apply to the digital world? Copyright is an idea that's been around for a long time, although Richard Stallman says it didn't exist in ancient times. So I'll connect that for you here in a minute. When authors frequently copied other authors at length in works of nonfiction. This practice was useful, and it's the only way many authors' works have survived, even in part to this day, is because somebody else copied it and pulled part of that forward. So Richard Stallman is the founder of the free software movement. And his belief is that all software ought to be free. It ought to be free to use, free to modify. He's a very interesting character. So this video will go into some detail about what copyright is anyhow, and it will give you a little bit of history. It kind of really took off at the advent of the printing press. Because before then, like think about it, before you had a printing press, how did people get books? They literally had to like write out the book. So making a copy was a big deal. Like somebody had to pay you to do that, right? With the printing press, things started rolling a little differently. And the whole idea of copyright is that you protect a creator's work. So once something is in a fixed format, fixed being it's in writing, it's a painting, it's something that's tangible, then you can copyright it. You can't copyright an idea, but you can copyright something in a fixed format. So where that gets tricky and where this video goes, and I'll warn you, he brings in George Lucas and talks about Star Wars. Where this video goes is this idea like, how does that apply in a digital world? Because right here, right now, your computer has made a copy of this in what's known as the cache of your web browser. So technically, you've made a copy. Does that infringe copyright? Anyhow, there's all kinds of interesting issues around this topic. So fundamentally, copyright is a law that gives ownership to you over the things you create. That's a good thing, right? You don't want to create something, spend all that time and effort and energy, and then have somebody just take it. So it can be anything creative, like a painting, a photograph, a poem, anything. So by default, there's an assumption that you own copyright, even if you've not filed any legal documents to protect it. You get a higher level of protection if you do that. But by default, if you've created it, it's copyrighted. So those rights to copyright include the right to reproduce your work, to prepare derivative works, and that previous video, he's going to talk about derivative works on Star Wars, to distribute copies, to perform the work, and to display the work publicly. So these are rights that just belong to you. And we're going to talk about this Creative Commons license in a few minutes. But unless you say otherwise, someone can't use your work legally. So if you put up something online, technically, legally, that's yours. Now, again, digital media makes that a little tricky because how hard is it to just copy something and plug it in somewhere else? Like on a computer, it's not hard at all. You just right click it or you copy and paste it, highlight it, do something, but it doesn't take you any time at all to copy something. So how does digital media change the traditional definition of copyright? Well, in this way, um, it's digital, so it's technically just electricity, right? Just ones and zeros, bits and bytes. It's not tangible. And so it makes some of the legalities of copyright being an entity in a fixed form really tricky. So this video is part of a much longer video, and on the checklist for the week, I actually linked to the full hour-long video, which is really interesting. But this will give you just a little bit of detail about this idea of copyright in a digital age. So this gentleman is Lawrence Lessig, and he is a pretty prominent intellectual property lawyer out of Stanford University. And two things I want you to pay attention to when you watch this is, first of all, just what he's talking about, because he'll give you an overview of what copyright means. But also look at how he uses his slides. So this is a talk that I think he gave to the Swedish Parliament. And so he's got his slides up on a screen behind him, and every once in a while they kind of pan up to the slides. He does slides in a really interesting way. He uses them to punctuate what he's saying, and it's very dramatic, so much so that it's actually referred to as the Lessig method of doing a presentation. So Lawrence Lessig came up with something called Creative Commons. We'll get to that in a minute. But this is a little bit of it's a short video. It's like 2 minutes long about how remixing, this idea of remixing, and if you're into music, you know, remixing is kind of a thing with different genres of music where they'll take something from one person and something from another person and put them together into something new. That's what this video talks about, is this idea that copyright has sort of grown and sort of become to the point where it doesn't allow for creativity. You need to have access to the past to create things for the future. So some things to think about in this segment is, what do you think we mean when we talk about someone's creative work? Like, what would count as that? Have you ever used creative work that you found online? And when you use creative work you find online, what considerations do you make about who made it, if any? Like if you grab a picture that you want to use on your website or in your document or something, do you contact the person who made it? Most people don't, but should you? Like, what if it was your work? What would you think? So let's look at this Creative Commons idea, because one of your assignments this week is to create a Creative Commons license. And so we'll look a little bit into what that's all about. Is there a updated copyright thing? So Creative Commons was developed. Lawrence Lessig was one of the instigators in that. And the idea is to create a method, because we're all creators now. Even a couple of decades ago, there were, you had the television stations, you had a very limited source. If I created something, the odds that it would go online and be shared were pretty slim, right? But now everybody's a creator. You post pictures, you write up stuff, you create videos, everybody's a creator. So Creative Commons was set to create easy to understand copyright licenses that are legally enforceable. And this video will talk about kind of the origins of Creative Commons and what it is exactly that they do. So when you go to watch that. And this one talks about how to use Creative Commons content. And what I found to be really interesting is Wikipedia now has, when you use a Wikipedia picture, that's all under Creative Commons licenses. Big photo sharing sites like Flickr offer Creative Commons licenses for people who upload their photos. There's just all sorts of places and people and organizations that are switching over to Creative Commons as a licensing mode. So this little short video kind of takes you through the steps of how to create a Creative Commons license, like we're doing for our homework. It's pretty simple. You literally just click a few boxes. So you always need permission from the copyright holder. You always have to have permission. The answer to that is no, not really. There are some instances where it is okay to use copyrighted material, but under specific conditions. That's the key, very specific conditions. So there's this thing called fair use. And in education, we come under that umbrella quite a bit. Okay, so let's take a look at what fair use is all about. So it's this idea that you use a small amount of a creative work without permission, but only in certain ways. So the purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational. So are you using it to make money? Are you selling it? Like, are you creating something with it and then selling it? Or are you using it for educational purposes? And then what is the nature of the copyrighted work is a consideration. How much of the copyrighted work are you using in relation to the whole? So if it's like a 3-hour movie and you're using a 5-minute clip, you're probably okay. If it's a 20-minute short, movie and you're using 5 minutes, that might come into question because that's 25% of the work. So how much you're using comes into account. But then this is a really important one. What's the effect of the use? Like, what's the effect of your use of the copyrighted work on the potential market or value of the copyrighted work? What does that mean? So by using it, do you impact the market value of the original? So this is an example of that. So this video is super interesting because it's been around for quite a while. It's got, I don't know, last time I saw like 10 million plus views. It's been viewed a lot. And this was put together using Disney clips. So clips from Disney movies. Now, Disney is very copyrighted, very locked down. And for a good reason. They don't want you to put Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, on your webpage in a compromising position. They've spent decades and decades and probably, I don't know, I want to say $1 billion, lots and lots of money coming up with an image of Mickey Mouse. When you see Mickey Mouse and you think Disneyland, what are you supposed to think? The Magic Kingdom, right? You're supposed to think of the happiest place on earth, family friendly. Like, they've spent a ton of time and money building that brand. And so if you take one of their major assets, Mickey Mouse, and you edit it or use it in such a way that counters that brand, They can nab you for brand infringement and copyright infringement, and they will. So what makes this video interesting is that they took clips of Disney movies to talk about fair use. And at the beginning, I think it says something about, if this violates fair use applications, then the video will be taken down. And YouTube's pretty strict about copyright infringement. If you've ever opened or used music on a video and uploaded it to YouTube, if it's not available for free use, YouTube will nail you. It'll take it down. It'll give you a warning. If you do too many of those, they'll just close your account. So watch this video. It goes into these points of fair use. I think you'll find it interesting. It's a little long. It's a little slightly irritating because they keep playing these really short clips, but it comes from a whole bunch of different movies. Makes a good point. So what's the big deal anyhow? Like, what are some ethical issues? So I'm going to give you two examples, and then I'm going to point to a couple of case studies if you're interested in learning more about why copyright might be a big deal. And there are some people that think copyright should be strengthened and we should keep it. And there's other people that think, everything ought to be out in the public domain because creativity builds on the past. You have to decide what you think. But here, whoops, wrong direction. But here's some issues. So I put this story up in Moodle. There's a resource called Katy and the Shark, and it'll give you all the details, but let me give you the thumbnail version. So back in, what was it, 2015, Katy Perry played the Super Bowl, halftime show, and she had this whole beach ball theme thing going on, okay? And she had these two sharks. Well, the shark on her left kept goofing up, kept messing up. And there's lots of stories about why the shark was messing up, like what the heck's going on there. And so lots of people did parodies of that, of this left shark. So this one guy down in Florida who does 3D design and 3D printing things created a file for Left Shark. Okay, so see my friend, I don't know how good you can see him. Here's my friend Left Shark. We 3D printed him. Well, he put Left Shark up on a website that allowed you to purchase 3D prints in different materials. So you could get it in gold, you could get it in ceramic, like all kinds of things. So creators would put it up there, and then you would buy it, and the creator would get a cut of it, and the website would get a cut of it, and everybody'd be happy. So he put Left Shark up there. Really quickly, he got a letter from Katy Perry's lawyers saying, you need to cease and desist. This is Katy's intellectual property. You're using this incorrectly without permission. He decided to fight it. And so I came into the story where I heard about the story was I saw it somewhere, and he had then taken the file off of the paid site and put this file up on a site called Thingiverse. Okay, and all of these links are in the resource on Moodle. So he put this up on Thingiverse. Well, Thingiverse lets anybody download anything for free. So you can create a file, put it up, and as many people as want to can download it and 3D print it for themselves if they have access to a printer. So that's where I found it. So I was about to talk to this class, about copyright issues and different things. And so I printed off 20 of these, and we put them, we got to class, we put them up on the screens, on top of the screens, and I took a picture of the class. And I posted it to Twitter, of course, because what else would I do? And I tagged, I used the hashtag that the guy in the article had said to use, hashtag 3D printed Left Shark. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. So, end of story, right? Not quite. I get home from school and I check my Twitter, and the guy who designed it messaged me. And he said something like, I don't know who you are, but what class is this? This is kind of weird. Why are my sharks all over your class, basically? And so we had this conversation that you'll see in that resource if you go click on that. It turned out what was interesting, spoiler alert here, is it went to court. Like they took him to court and they lost. The judge said, you cannot prove that this is Katy Perry's intellectual property. This guy has a right to do what he wants to with it. Super interesting, huh? Now, here's another case study. So any idea what this sucker is? It's kind of a weird looking little widget. So, in your car, you've got that sun visor, and it clips into that little thing up on the top. And otherwise, it just flops all over the place, right? So you have to have that little clip. So in our Suburban, the little clip broke. The visor was fine, and nothing wrong with the visor, but the clip broke. So every time I'd come to a stop, I get whacked in the face with the sun visor. So my husband knows how to 3D design stuff. So he took a couple of measurements and he designed up a clip. And we have 3D printers. So he printed the clip off and screwed it in place. And lo and behold, it worked. Like that's super good, right? Um, we did actually go try to buy one before he designed it up. And it turned out at the time you could only buy the entire visor, like the whole assembly for $150. And, we were willing to pay like $5 for a clip, but we weren't going to buy a whole new thing. So that's when he designed it up. And when he found out at first was, I don't know if you can tell, a little hard to see on this picture. So at first he designed it up so he printed it horizontally, so the rows were all horizontal. And it lasted for a little while, I want to say a couple of weeks, but every time you snapped it in, whoops, every time you snapped it in, it snapped, it was hitting the layer line. So it broke. So what he did is he ended up tipping it the other direction to print it with the lines vertically. I might have that backwards. It was one way or the other. Anyhow, that way it worked. It was super strong. It was something about the physics and the way it hit the break it line and all that. Anyhow, so it worked. So we screwed it in. So was that a copyright issue? Well, probably. That's probably copyrighted for sure, or patented or something. But we were able to design it and print it. And a lot of manufacturers now are giving you or making available the 3D files, like the design files. So you can download the design file for $5 and print it yourself. Here's a couple of other cases if you're interested. The Supreme Court is now taking on Google and Oracle one last time. These guys have been battling it out over Android for quite a while, and it's going to the Supreme Court. Hopefully that will finalize it. There's a case study about digital downloads, like when you download music. There's a case study called Appropriating Hope, and it has to do with that iconic picture from the Obama campaign where it's sort of a split color screen. Anyhow, it became an iconic picture, and so somebody took that and used it for something else. And then what are the blurred lines of copyright? So just cases if you're interested in learning a little bit more. The thing I want you to take away from this is to talk about or think about, like, how should copyright laws be adjusted to take into account the impact of new technologies? We have 3D printers, we have all kinds of technology now that lets making a copy super easy. Okay. So if it's super easy, do we need to change the law? Like, how should that work? And then on a more personal level, how can I make responsible choices when I use other people's work? Are you using other people's creative work under fair use? Are you getting permission? Like what are you what's your responsibility there? Because if you flip it around, how do you want people to use your creative work? So that's just a brief overview. Make sure you go back through class, watch all the videos because some of them are really good. They're all really good. They're really interesting. They'll give you a broader look at what copyright is all about. And I think you'll learn a lot.